Almighty Father in heaven, in the name of your Son, our glorious and victorious Savior, Jesus Christ, we humbly ask for your blessing upon our worship of you on this, your holy and sanctified Sabbath day, so that we may grow more in our knowledge of you, our love for you, and our obedience to you. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. Amen. The book of Daniel is one of the most amazing and accurate, although all the prophets are accurate, but one of the most amazingly accurate as a matter of the way the world, quote unquote, looks at it. One of the most strange criticisms that historians have of the prophecies that were written by the prophet Daniel, or given to be written by the prophet Daniel from the Lord, and they can recognize who he was talking about, those kingdoms, the empires, successive kingdoms, Alexander the Great, even specifically by name, all those things. Their criticism was that, and is still, is that, well, it's just too accurate. It had to have been written after when it was actually written. They don't say actually written, but their criticism is it's too accurate. I mean, that in itself is just an amazingly head-shaking thing. Why can't they just accept the fact that prophecy was spoken of accurately? And prophecy is really just history written in advance anyway. But you know, the Apostle John would have certainly recognized it after he was given to write it. Not at the prior time to that, although he was certainly aware of the book of Daniel, as a devout Jew would have been, John. He was an ordinary guy, but he would have been aware of the teachings. He certainly would have been aware of the teachings from the Messiah, the prophecies that were given to them. But John, after he was given to write the book of Revelation, which was actually a letter, an epistle, it's actually an epistle, it's only gone for that, he must have said to himself, hey, this is very familiar to what was given to Daniel, the prophet. And it is. Some of the symbolism and some of the things that were spoken used different terminology as a matter of greater enlightenment or greater describing something that could be understood in John's own time, the symbolism that was described in Daniel's own time, but in our hindsight we know exactly what we're talking about, they're talking about, and we're talking about, if you stick close to it with what is actually written, because the symbolism as a matter of the prophecies and the history were fulfilled. We've done them. We've been there. We've done that throughout history. But, as the Messiah also spoke of, when you see the abomination spoken of by the prophet Daniel, as we'll get to as we read through the book of Daniel, then his return is about to happen. So the ultimate prophecies, many of them, and we'll get to that as well, the future events, the abomination of desolation, again, as Daniel wrote, as John would have recognized plainly, Revelation 13, who would be committing it, those two people, and how they will be someone who will be so popular in the world's eyes, the world's view of things, and how people can look at things through their own nationalism and claim it to be Christianity, rather than humbling themselves before the Word of God, because in the end, that reckoning is going to happen, and all the ideas that man have created, religious, political, military, just a general attitude toward our fellow man, are going to go poof. They're going to be gone. The Lord is not going to allow delusional people running around in his kingdom anymore. And, really that in itself is a restoration to the beginning. The kingdom of God existed already, as it already existed on earth at the time of the creation. And Adam and Eve, in their sinless state, they weren't delusional. They understood the Lord, his word. They understood it very well. But along came Satan with his delusions of himself and misled them and made them, I think in that sense, made humanity stronger. I've referred to Satan as a dumbbell, like a weightlifter's dumbbell, in that the resistance that he provides us as in humanity, makes us stronger. Whereas Adam and Eve, they were so innocent, so absolutely innocent, that they were gullible to just anyone who comes along. They could never think that, hey, maybe this guy is a liar, because there weren't any yet. They had never encountered a liar before. And when he assumed to speak for the Lord or explain it to them or interpret what they were actually given, well, then they just, oh, okay. And then they went off, and suddenly lust crossed their eyes and crossed the border of where they were not to have been gone. There was a particular tree, people debated that. What kind of tree was it? Was it an apple? Well, not likely, but if anything, it was likely a fig tree. There's only one kind of tree mentioned in the Garden of Eden, and that's the fig tree. And it's interesting that as soon as they took of the forbidden fruit, their eyes were open, so they took leaves, fig leaves, specifically fig leaves. That in itself was a pretty strong proof. It didn't have to be a different kind of tree. It could have been just one fig tree among millions of fig trees. But it's the same kind of test. It's what humans want. If you put a bunch of children together, they're going to all want the toy that someone could say to them, don't touch that one. It could be the room full of toys, but suddenly when someone says, don't do that, then look out. Because not only are they all, or most of them, going to want it, but then the wars are going to start. And the crying and the screaming and all the rest. Typical humans. Humans never really grow up beyond that point yet. There may well be a purpose for that. But what Daniel was given to see as an exile, keeping in mind he lived the exile, he was taken away early enough, he didn't see the destruction of Jerusalem. When he last saw it, it would have still been there in its grandeur. The Temple of Solomon would have still been there. It would have been corrupted, of course, but Daniel, he was not responsible for any of that. He was just a youth when he was taken away. There is some speculation that he was or became a eunuch. There's actually a prophecy of that. I'll put the link on for that study. And the fact that he was raised by the captain who was, or the leader, the man in charge of the eunuchs, Daniel, and his associates, his fellow youths who were taken there. It's an irrelevant point, but it may well be also a matter of what was given to the throne to exist, and yet at the same time among them as well, somewhere else, there was the throne of the Messianic line that did survive, and certainly would not have done so through a eunuch, because it did survive. And the people who were given there, Daniel, he was not living a hard life there. He did not experience what John did, although he was a prisoner and he was thrown in the lion's den, but his faith saved him and gave him the strength and the power, the presence of mind to never be intimidated by anybody or anyone. And that's something good to have in this world such as it is. The world such as it is becoming so perverted in every possible way that if you happen to believe the Word of God, or if you have any moral principles at all, you could be an atheist and still have moral principles, but you're going to be viewed as something wrong. And sooner or later, they're going to come after you for that, because they just can't handle any kind of difference. This idea where political correctness, are you among those who have just about had your fill of it yet? I think a lot of people are, and probably more and more there's going to be a backlash against that. I think most people are sick of it. It's one thing to be going along with something, and if someone wants to live a life of degeneracy for themselves, that is their business. Quite right about that. But when they become aggressive about it, when they have an agenda, then it becomes something very, very different. It becomes tyranny. And, Daniel never really lived any of that. He was a righteous man, a young man. He grew into adulthood there. Even when the king's edict, don't pray to any other idol, pray to any other god but my idol. Well, that just didn't fizz at all on Daniel. He prayed just exactly as he always did. The snitches got him, of course, because why? Well, what reason could they have? But they did, and he was thrown in the lion's den, and all the things that he was given to do, and not only to the Babylonian kings, the service that he rendered to them as a matter of the prophecies that were given to them. All of these things we will cover as we read the book of Daniel. We'll get started on it today. But just to understand where we are in the history of Judah and the history of the world, because again, these aren't just simply reading those way back there, back in that ancient time, those Jews over there, and all the things that people use as their excuse to deny the reality that much of what Daniel and what the other prophets have written hasn't happened yet. And as the Messiah himself said, it was the key prophecy that he himself quoted when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. And the original one, as it was given in prophecy to him, it hadn't happened yet in Daniel's time. Daniel not only saw one of them in the yet future time from his time, but two of them. He saw both of them, and how the Greeks did Antiochus Epiphanes, and how he was given. It was not only a matter, of committing an atrocity of sacrificing a pig in the temple, knowing that it was an affront to the people of Judah, but it was a matter of his own religion. He was a pig worshiper. It was a matter of, he didn't sort of say, well, the people of Judah hate pigs, so I'll go get a pig and sacrifice. He was doing it all the time. And the atrocity that was committed there at that time. Again, the temple, keeping in mind, it was the rebuilt temple, it wasn't the original temple of Solomon, but the rebuilt temple that had been built. A rather modest one of them all. It was actually the most modest. It certainly didn't have the grandeur of Solomon's temple. And, by that time, the Ark of the Covenant was hidden. It wasn't there. It was there, I think. I don't think there's any way it could have been anywhere else. The Levites wouldn't have moved it because they were obedient. And anyone else who tried to carry it away, whether it be the Babylonians or whoever, the Romans, whatever, they would have been dead. They would have been very happy to put it back as the Palestinians or Philistines. Put a link onto that. That's what the word is, by the way, in English. The Gaza residents, Palestinians, Philistines. But, they couldn't have taken it anywhere. So the abomination of the temple in itself, that holy place, even though removal of the arks from within the most holy place. And it's also interesting how actually they observed the Day of Atonement without getting going on that, without the ark there, without the ark being there visibly, which could cause some to speculate that the high priest did know that it was there, and that when he went in, there may have been a secret chamber, which was used by the Levites to hide it, to lower it down in there, and he could have still done that. And whether or not that will happen in that particular way, people speculate. But it doesn't matter, because we know that, as told by the Messiah, there will be an abomination of desolation, as spoken of by the prophet Daniel. And when that happens, the martyrdom of the two witnesses will occur just prior to that time. It's the same time frame. And they will lie dead in the street of Jerusalem for 3.5 days. I heard from another one just a couple of weeks ago. I stopped counting long ago, but it must be well over 200, maybe closing in on 300 by now, delusional people who claim to be one or both the two witnesses. People, for whatever reason, they think self-aggrandizing, self-worshipping, my aren't I wonderful attitude people who think they want to do that. And I don't reply to them, but it's just why people want to be that, to be one of the most, who will be the most two-hated people on earth. And it's not something people point to themselves. I suspect that, the two witnesses could come out of absolutely nowhere, because that's the way the prophets throughout the Bible were. They were chosen by the Lord. They might have been going about their lives as shepherds or whatever they were, just living their lives, or Daniel, just a youth of the exile, and suddenly the Lord says, guess what? You're a prophet. You can use that terminology, but practically, to use a modern vernacular, that's really what it was. I've simply chosen you to be a prophet, so here's what you're going to do. And they did it. It wasn't a matter of, well, I want to be a star and I want to go out and have all the people look up to me. Because if you read the account, people aren't going to be looking up to them. They're going to be looking to kill them. Except for the people of the true church, but the minority at that time, very much a minority as it's always been. And at that time, the Great Tribulation, all the things that they're going to have their own problems as well. The church is going to be happening as well. And they're going to be the last ones to preach the true gospel, the last warning before the Messiah's return. But again, at that time, the connection, and many people overlook it, the martyrdom of the two witnesses, the abomination of desolation is prophesied by Daniel, the second one, although Daniel, he saw them both. It's just an amazing book. And, as we said, the book of Revelation, John would have recognized it. Much of it. He wouldn't have recognized it before he wrote it because he didn't know what the Lord was going to give him to write. It wasn't a matter of, let's make another copy of Daniel's book. Well, here's what Daniel wrote, so here's my little spin on it. Here's the way I look at it. It wasn't at all like that. The Lord appeared to John on the island of Patmos and gave him to write it. And so he did. But at the time of his completion, after all the dictating of what he was given to write was done, then he would have recognized, hey, this is very much what Daniel was given. And explains and portrays and covers a lot more of it by means of what was given to be there. Because the prophecies are absolutely amazing. And the fact that people who are unbelievers would say that it can't be real because it's so accurate. I mean, think about that. The paradox of what they're saying. And it is accurate. It's just amazingly accurate. Right? The descriptions of the Greek king and of Alexander and all the things, all that we'll get to, the ram and the he-goat prophecies and all the things, the prophecies of the empires that would exist from the time of the Babylonian king, which is when Daniel lived, in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, who was the one who took down Judah, of which Daniel was a citizen. And, Ezekiel was another one, a contemporary, but he had a different sort of ministry. There was an age difference, but he was given to minister to, Ezekiel was given to minister to the people of that time, as was Jeremiah. He gave them a letter. Jeremiah rode the city down. He stayed to the end. Ezekiel was also taken as an exile. He didn't stay till the end, as was Daniel. They left separately or were taken away separately because it was a gradual, just as the northern kingdom was. The Galilee captivities, the 2.5 tribes east of the Jordan were the first to go because they were simply in the line of march. They were the first to go down and then worked their way down from, the Assyrians did, from Galilee and then into Samaria and took them down, and then they stopped at the border of Judah, and as the Lord permitted them to do. And then they got a little bit arrogant and decided, well, we're going to take Judah too, and that was a mistake. They laid siege to the city. Sennacherib blasphemed the Lord, and he lost 185,000 troops. And he went home and was assassinated by his own 2 sons. You can do what you can do, but don't go beyond that. And then Judah lasted for about 135 years until they went down. Again, in the time of Daniel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. But Jeremiah gave them the letter. They knew they were going to come back. I'll also put on the link why they didn't want to. It wasn't a matter of being released from cages or prison camps or something. They had homes, their own property. They were working. They were free. They had it just as good as the people in Goshen did until their slavery started. The ones in Babylon, they were never slaves. And they had it so good they didn't want to go back. And for most of them, it's understandable because the place they went back to is a place they'd never been. 70 years after the exile, a lot of them would have been at the very least the children of the exiles. Most of them, would have been grandchildren or even great-grandchildren. They never went back. Imagine if someone, your ancestor 2 generations ago, came to North America, and now suddenly someone says to you, well, you have to go back to the old country, wherever your parents or grandparents came from. Would you want to do that? Probably not. And that's what they were given to do. But it was the purpose of going to back. It was a matter that they were pure, they were clean, they weren't corrupt. And among them was people like Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah. They weren't just easy people. They were very devout in what they were given to do. And they had teachers, the Levites that went with them. Among those, the ones who knew where the ark was. They didn't take the ark. They wouldn't have. So the Lord told him not to move it. But that is the basis of where Daniel was, and then when the Lord appeared to him to begin the prophecies that he was given. But it's something as well, keeping in mind that time frame and the duality of it, because we aren't, as we read, as we work our way through it, it isn't a matter of history or the prophecies that he was given and then those prophecies were fulfilled in his own time. Some of them were, as a matter of the statue, the great image that was shown to Nebuchadnezzar, the prophecy of the fall of the Babylonian Empire to the Persians, and that the handwriting on the wall, which was the hand writing on the wall. It wasn't handwriting on the wall, although it was handwriting on the wall, but it was actually the prophecy of it was, such as it was. But all those things were given to Daniel, and some of them were fulfilled then. But moreover, most of the book, 60% or more, I would say, 2/3 or more, hasn't happened yet. And you're going to live, if you happen to be living in the end time, you're going to see the prophecies of Daniel happen, just as you're going to see the prophecies of the book of Revelation written by John. As we said, many of them are the same, or not merely repetitions, but rather are different views, different angles, different perspectives of the same event. It's like stereo vision, being able to see something in a way that gives you a better view of what it is. So it's an amazing book, but it's something as well that has a lot of scary stuff in it as well, because you happen to be living through the end time. It's not going to be easy, like the people who claim to be the two witnesses. No one in their right mind, and that's maybe a clue what I think of people who think they are, no one in their right mind would want to be one of the two witnesses. That's not to say that I think they'll be out of their minds. I think they're going to be two of the most stable people in the world at that time, because they're going to be living according to the Word of God, basing their lives and their attitudes and their beliefs and their behavior. And that's certainly in very much the right mind. But as a matter of what the world is going to view of that, because you're going to be hated. You're going to be, if you're one of them or two of them, you're going to be hated by the world. You're going to suffer a horrendously brutal, violent death. Your bodies are going to be left in the street for 3.5 days. You're already going to be a mess. I mean, that's the reality of it, from the way they died, and then lay there for another 3.5 days. And then people refusing to bury them, and no doubt further atrocities given to the body. They're used for target practice, and they're going to be really bad. But the thing is, after 3.5 days, the Lord's going to have them stand up on their feet, resurrected, and ascend to heaven. The first of the first fruits. They will be the first of the first resurrection of humanity. And not long after that will come the Messiah, the abomination of desolation, as we will read, and the first resurrection, the return of Jesus Christ. That's how the book of Daniel ends, the return of Jesus Christ. And again, as we'll book the book of Revelation, we could actually do them together, but we're not. We're doing it in order. But they are very much together. Perhaps when all the sermons have been done, if you happen to be listening to this one, you could go to the ones for the book of Revelation as well. That'll all be on there. Beginning today then, today is sermon number 627 overall, sermon 199 in our ongoing complete reading of the Holy Bible, King James translation, Daniel chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And an important point, that siege lasted 18 months. I'll put the link on for that study. Nothing went in, nothing came out, including the ark. There was no reason to take it out prior to that time. And as I said, the only people who could have carried it without being killed would not have taken it out no matter what. They would have hidden it, and I think beyond that most holy place, and it's a known fact that the Temple Mount is literally riddled pun and pun intended, with tunnels, some natural, some man-made. Hezekiah's water shaft in there. They started digging at both ends and met in the middle because they followed what was known to be a natural water shaft. They enlarged it and perhaps made it into an escape shaft as well, which is probably it can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing, depends on how many people know about it. But there's no way they could have, for example, the high priest could have taken it out there, because the city was under siege. There's nothing that went out. And all the other items, the sacred items, I'll put the link on for those things, for those studies, all those things are listed. I mean, even the most mundane pots, wick trimmers from the lamps, everything, the menorah, everything is listed, but the ark, nothing, no sounds, nothing about it. And if it had been taken, you can be absolutely sure there would be more written about it, because they would have been very happy to put it back. It was something the Philistines learned when they got it. Actually, when the parting, that's an interesting point as well, when the parting of the tabernacle and the ark happened in the time of Eli, in the time of his two corrupt sons, they took it into battle and lost it. But it was never returned to the tabernacle after that time. And it remained what it was. But the thing is, it was in a place that it was not a part of the man-made religion anymore. And that in itself is also another interesting point, in that it was removed from those who had become corrupted, who had used the temple for that purpose. It was the reason the temple was going down. Again, from the time of Daniel, he missed it, but he would have seen it. He was a youth when he was taken away, so he would have seen that temple. But it was a place of heathenism, as being practiced by the people of Judah. And this is not, I'm not talking about Judaism, because that originated in the time after the return of the people of Judah from Babylonian exile 70 years after that. And it would have went on, it wouldn't have started even then for a long time, certainly not in the lifetime of Zerubbabel or Ezra and Nehemiah. They would never, absolutely never have tolerated it. But it began later on. Some think by the time of the Maccabees, and ironically in the time of the abomination of desolation, at that time committed by Antiochus and his pig. So, the connections are there. If you just follow the dots around, connect the dots like a children's book, and if you follow the dots, you're going to see the picture, because there's no way it can go anywhere else. It's just no possible way, unless you're dreaming of something where the Garden of Eden was on the other side of the world, because this is where we happen to be, or all the other excuses and things. Some think it's in heaven, but it's going to be there at that particular time. And I'm speaking of the time of the two witnesses. But that doesn't mean it isn't risen with them. And again, the abomination of desolation, they will be killed at the very moment, the very time, the very days in which that has happened. Because the abomination of desolation is a very important point as well. There's so much we could cover here. We could do like 3 or 4 sermons just on this first chapter, or actually this first paragraph. But the thing is that the point of the matter is that many people think that the abomination of desolation is the Muslim presence up on the Temple Mount, or the mosques up there, or the Dome of the Rock, or all just any kind of number of things. But the Lord said, when you see it, get out of Jerusalem. And when he said it, he was referring to the very time in which he will return, and which is also the very time of the martyrdom of the two witnesses at that future time. Many of those other things that people say are the abomination, they've been there, some of them, for centuries. Whereas the real one, the one that the Messiah spoke of, it's going to be very brief. But he said, when you see it, get out of town. Don't even go if you live there, don't go home to get anything. Don't if you're a tourist, don't go to your hotel to get your luggage or your passport, if you leave it around, which you should never do. Get out of town. Just get out of there, because the wrath is going to be so intense, so quick, so fast, that there's no time to even go cross town to your hotel or across wherever to where you live. That's how fast it's going to occur. And again, the very same time as the two witnesses will be martyred. So I think it's connected. It has to be. Again, to connect the dots. There's no other reason. And their ascension to heaven with the Ark of the Covenant, there, after that time, mentioned only, the first time it's mentioned in the Holy Scriptures is in it when it's in heaven after the ascension of the two witnesses who will be murdered at the time the abomination of desolation occurs in Jerusalem, which would require the Ark of the Covenant. The original tabernacle was created for two reasons: to portray two things. Number one, the tabernacle in which we live in, the skin and skeletal entity that we are. That's how it was built, made of animal skins, and within it, at the very heart of it, was the law of the Lord. And you see how easy the analogy of that is. It was also intended to be a place, a portrayal of the Messiah's ascension to heaven, where he appeared as portrayed and fulfilled in the Day of Atonement. The Messiah, the risen Messiah, after he ascended to heaven, appearing before the throne of God to deliver his blood sacrifice from Passover. He was then given the scroll, his mandate, his commission, his orders, if you will, for his return. He sat down at the right hand of God and is awaiting that time in which the Father will say to him, now's the time to go. And those things that were abominated, again, it isn't just a matter of abominating a Jewish temple, because it was never built as a Jewish temple. It was built as the Lord's temple for the purpose of demonstrating a Christian life and the Christian deliverance of the Passover blood to the throne of God, to making the payment. And when people began using it for all sorts of asinine things, for their own religion, their own politics, some of it just outright hokey-pokey heathenism, where they would literally turn their backs to the temple and bow before the rising sun in the east. They did that up at the Lincoln for sun worship in Israel. Is it any wonder that the Lord blew the thing away? Is it any wonder? And why he took away his ark and the symbolism of it, not only the symbolism of his law in our hearts, but the very symbol of the throne of God in heaven. Is it any wonder that he took it away from them? And it's going to stay somewhere safe until such time that, guess what? As soon as it's going to come out, they're going to do it again. They would have been doing it for centuries since then. The abomination of desolation, that's what it is. And why it's going to be taken away from them again, perhaps ascending at the very same time as the two witnesses. Because it's not mentioned until after their ascension to heaven. And there's no reason for it to be in heaven. God's throne is already in heaven. We don't need a symbol. God doesn't need a symbol of his throne in heaven when his throne is in heaven already. The symbolism. And our hearts are down here still. Hopefully getting right by God, by God's law. See how it's connected? You can't, if you go off, if you just stay on the path, that's where the lights are. The guiding lights, it's where they are. And if you go off into the wilderness of your own ideas, well, it's going to get pretty dark out there. I mean, you can light your own light. You can do that. But the thing is, it's not going to be the Lord's light. And don't forget that Satan, his original name meant light bringer. He's got lots of light. He's a very bright boy, but he's as evil as it gets. We will cover all of this. Verse 2, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim king of Judah into his hands with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And again, those we'll hear more about those again, because it was those very vessels that were used, or the response to the misuse of them was the reasoning for the handwriting on the wall. The handwriting on the wall, handwriting on the wall, means both things. Those very things. And those things were also returned. Again, it's listed in the scriptures at the time of the return. They were put back into that temple. A more modest temple, no doubt it was, because they had really limited resources to work with. All the rubble, no doubt a lot of the things that they used were the broken stones, and there wouldn't have been much wood they could have used, because that would all burn, that fine cedar from up in Lebanon. And the lumber that they would have got would have been local, probably local pine, which is nice, but it's not as fragrant and beautiful as the cedars of Lebanon, which are the reasons that Solomon got it. It's a beautiful wood, but it's highly aromatic, but it has a lot of resins in it. And if you have a wood stove, you know why you don't put that kind of wood in your wood stove. It'll gum up your chimney, and it will burn overly hot. Verse 3, and the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding in science, and such as had ability in them to understand the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And again, as we mentioned, the Daniel and the youths that were with him at that time of the exile were given into the charge of the keeper of the eunuchs. Now, is that a hint? Do you think there's a hint there? And there's actually a prophecy regarding that. We know it wouldn't have been all of them, so it could have been some unknown, relatively unknown, which the Messianic line survived, because we know it did. I'll put the link on for that. But as for Daniel, it's pretty plain. I mean, it's pretty plainly stated. It makes absolutely no difference, but it's just something that a lot of people, Daniel's grave, people will argue about that. There are actually a number of Daniel's graves that people have identified. The primary one, the most likely one, is in what is today Iran, keeping in mind that Iran, was known in ancient times as Persia. It only was known as Iran since around the 1920s, somewhere in there at that time. It was known as Persia later on, and they celebrate the fact that there's nothing in it for them is something I think that gives more credence to the claims. When you have someone who would rather not even have it, as a matter of keeping in mind the Muslim religion, and certainly Daniel was not a Muslim. If you have somebody making that statement, and it's not a claim really, it's just a statement, they respect him as a prophet, as in fact, at least Muhammad did. He had to do so because he claimed to be a prophet, so he couldn't just sort of ignore or disparage all the others if he was claiming to be one of them. Unfortunately, he made a religion out of himself in the same way, and reduced the Messiah to a mere prophet. But the connections that are there, and they make that plain statement. I'll put the link on for the study. It shows a photograph of what is believed to be Daniel's tomb in Persia, or Iran today. Because we know at the end, with the fall of the Babylonian Empire, as stated in the Bible, he became a high-ranking official of the Persians as well. Darius. I heard one man make fun of some people's pronunciation of Darius or Darius, but actually it's the same. It's merely a Greek or Latin rendering into English of one or the other. Both are right. I'll put the link on for that. Darius or Darius, it's the same as St. Louis or St. Louis. A lot of people think that St. Louis is a slang term for St. Louis, but it's not. It's St. Louis is the English version of it, and St. Louis is the French. And it was, keeping in mind, it was founded as part of New France at that time, what was called New France, by the French. Louisiana, same thing. The same, do people say Louisiana, or do they say Louisiana? The French, it's the same thing as St. Louis and St. Louis. So there's actually a Canadian connection to Louisiana. What became known to people known as the Cajuns was actually an abbreviation of Acadian, when the French and English were having it, settling just who was going to be the owners of Canada. A lot of the people of eastern Canada, the Acadians, went south to what was then a French colony in Louisiana, and the Acadians became known as Cajuns. It's a different pronunciation of Acadian. You probably won't hear that question on Jeopardy anymore either. Canadians, you may have read last week, Canadians are now banned from Jeopardy, which they never actually gave the reason for that, although a lot of people suspect they know the answer. But it's kind of ironic that Canadians are no longer allowed on the U.S. show Jeopardy, when in fact the host of the show, Alex Trebek, he's French-Canadian, from Northern Ontario, I think it is. Actually, I put a comment on the CBC website about that a few days ago. Verse 5, and the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hanok, Mishael, Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and Mishael of Meshach, and Azariah of Abednego. And again, the transition, the new names, it's think of it as you will. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, as thou seest, deal with thy servants. And again, I'll put the link on for meat when it was a vegetable. It was we'll put the link on for that. It doesn't necessarily mean meat. It can mean other things. Vegetables, fruit, whatever. Then it did enter. Verse 14, and he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Then Mizar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Daniel, of course, became a very prominent prophet for that very reason. His 3 friends became famous for being cast into the blazing furnace for refusing to defile themselves by praying to an idol. Verse 18, now at the end of the days that the king had said he would bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. And of course, Cyrus was of Persia. And it was he, as we'll read, and as we read already in earlier prophecies, including Jeremiah, that he was actually mentioned specifically by name. Cyrus was before he was even born. I mean, again, the prophecies, how accurate they can be. But all the prophets, they could make that criticism, unfortunately for them, for all the prophets, because, and again, the prophecies were not, some of them, or a lot of them perhaps, were dual in nature in that they had an immediate application, but oftentimes the earlier fulfillment was really just in itself an object lesson, really what's coming in great power at the end. And how, for example, the connection between Zerubbabel and the high priest Joshua at that time, I'll put the link on for the lamps and olive trees prophecies, how the connection is made in that. But you can, and again, as we said, as we'll get to, the prophecies that were given here, as they were before the original abomination of desolation occurred. That it actually occurred in the time, as we're reading here, was the peak of the Babylonian Empire power, which was followed by the Persians, which was followed by the Greeks. And in Daniel's time, he was likely aware of the Persian prophecy. All he had to do was read the book of Jeremiah to read it specifically by name. He could have went to the Persian kings and said, well, here's a prophecy about your country, a king that you're going to have someday who isn't even born yet. This is going to be his name. We'll have nothing to do with naming him. It's the Lord's will that he be named that. And he could have done that. But the Greeks were yet so far in the future, and they are a part. It's the one reason the books of Maccabees, without getting into the other ones, which are most of the fairy tales, Maccabees is historic. If you want to read that, it has a benefit in that way, because the Old Testament, so-called Old Testament, and the New Testament, there's a time gap of the record of about 200 or 300 years, and that's when the Greek Empire peaked, and when the first abomination of desolation occurred, and when the Maccabees overthrew that branch of the Greek Empire from up in Syria, the Seleucids. Ptolemies were down in Egypt after the death of Alexander, broke into 4 big chunks, 2 of which were primarily fighting over the land of Israel. They didn't really care about the religion or anything else. The Ptolemies down in Egypt, Cleopatra and her connection there to Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, and how when they were defeated, Cleopatra and Mark Antony were defeated. They were defeated by Octavian, who's known in the Bible as Caesar Augustus. He was the first imperial Roman king. Julius Caesar was never any of that. He was gone by then. But it was Augustus, earlier known as Octavian, who called for that very famous census that people go to their hometowns, and that in turn caused the Messiah to fulfill the prophecy of being born in Bethlehem. So that was that part of it. And then up to the northeast were the Syrian, the Seleucids, Antiochus IV. He had a very high opinion of himself, but most people called him the crazy man, which he probably was, or perhaps normal in this world such as it is. I think we're getting to that again. Look around, but it's something that it's a repetition of human nature, which isn't human nature, ironically, because true human nature is what we were given when we were created by the Lord, a sinless, loving, wise, though gullible earlier on. As I said, there's maybe a reason for knowing evil, because we've become stronger. We're not as gullible now. It's the reason perhaps the Lord said, be as wise as serpents, but harmless as doves. What serpents do you think he was talking about there? But it doesn't mean we should act like him or be like him. We just don't want to be gullible. We're a lot stronger. Adam and Eve were just really easy pickings. They knew the truth, but somebody just came along and said, no, well, this is the more of it. And they just sort of said, oh, isn't that nice? And Adam, of course, a lot of people think Eve was caught out by herself, but according to the scriptures, Adam was standing there and said nothing. What was he doing? He was the one that was originally given the instructions of not taking from that one tree. Eve wasn't even created yet. It was originally given to Adam. And whether Eve, the Lord told her specifically on her own, or whether Adam had the responsibility of telling her, because there's no way she could have known otherwise. She didn't even exist yet. But he just stood there. He should have just said something, shouldn't he? He should have done something. But again, the gullibility. Some people think he was all handpicked. Is that the people still use that word? And he was just she was taking the lead and all. But there was, as the innocence, the gullibility, there was no reason for him to think otherwise. It's just everybody, they were so loving and so innocent and so good, which works fine if everybody else is the same way. But here comes the old devil, and look what happened. And, hopefully we won't fall. We wouldn't fall, pun intended, for those lies, although it's pretty easy, because he knows how to appeal to people in their own ways, their own lusts, their own wants, whether it be political or religious, makes no difference. Politics, I think he corrupts more people through that, because you get them going on their politics. How many political parties claim to be God's favorites or carrying out God's will? Even Hitler made claims like that. Put the link, surprisingly, put the link on for presidential quotes. Some of the things you said are absolutely crazy. And yet, what's even more crazy and scary is a lot of things that Hitler said, as quoted there, is translated into English. You can hear the same words being said by some politicians today. Very same thing. I'll put the link on for, is iniquity liberal or conservative? And it's not either. one. Iniquity is iniquity. Politics came later, but all the nations that were created, all the things that were done, it's the same old, same old. There's nothing new about it. And again, which is a good thing, because if you come to understand any principle from the Bible, it works just as well today as it did any other time before or since, or yet to come. Daniel chapter 2, this is one of the biggies of the Bible as a matter of what was given for Daniel, or to Daniel, to see and to record. It's the one that really drives the critics around the corner, because it's too accurate, they say. And they know. And as we get farther into it, it gets even far more accurate, hair-raisingly accurate. Any honest historian could read the Bible and say, yeah, it's real. By that alone, that proof alone. And I'm sure some must have, but it's a hard thing in this world. So many people come to the truth, and for whatever reason, it may cost them their job, it may cost them their career, it may cost them the respect, the adoration, whatever, their family problems, all the things, all the excuses. But if you cling to this world, that's going to be it. That's where you put yourself. As the Lord said, what profiteth a man to gain the whole world and lose his very self? And you have to make a choice of what you want to do. You stand your ground, no matter what it costs you. And if you do that, you're going to end up with a whole lot more than trying to cling to what you think you can get into this world, because this world is nothing compared to the eternal world that's coming. And everything in this world anyway belongs to the Lord. We will be the inheritors of all things if we make it, but until then, we're sort of freeloaders on this earth. We don't really own the Lord's earth. It's only when the inheritance of the creation, not only the earth, but everything. That's why our Father is called our Father, why inheritance is used in that particular way. The only difference is that the Father isn't going to die. It's not like a will, a human will. But again, it is His will that we become His children. That's what born again truly means, as we're conceived by the Holy Spirit of our Father. Daniel chapter 2, and I will put on the links for these studies, because we could be here for a very long time. Just Daniel chapter 2. Practically verse by verse, what is covered and extrapolated through all the rest of the Holy Scriptures, forward or back. It doesn't make any difference. And again, the beauty of it. Daniel chapter 2, and in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, and the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, to shew the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will shew the interpretation. The king answered and said unto the Chaldeans, The thing is gone from me. If ye will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses be made a dunghill. Now, these were the people. Obviously, Nebuchadnezzar didn't have a whole lot of faith or trust left in them. They were sort of like the court jesters, good like going to a fortune teller at a carnival. That's really what they'd become, because it's very easy to interpret something if you already know what it is. And, that's obviously what they were doing. So just once now, Nebuchadnezzar was going to say, well, before you interpret it, tell me what it was. And actually, the way it's worded here, it sounds like he forgot it. And when they reminded him, then he could remember what it was. It's like you have a dream. People dream all the time, and you get up in the morning, you had a dream. You might have forgotten it, and then suddenly you remember it. Well, it could be what he was doing there, but he obviously did remember it if he did forget it. So it could have been a dual test in that way. But the point of what he was doing, obviously, was that he didn't want to simply tell them whether he remembered it or not. He might have thought, well, this is a good opportunity to really test these people, to do that. To which they replied, verse 6, But if you shew the dream and the interpretation thereof, you shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore shew me the dream and the interpretation thereof. They answered again and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will shew the interpretation of it. And the king answered and said, I know of certainty that you would gain the time, because ye see the thing is gone from me. But if you will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you, for ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that ye shall shew me the interpretation thereof. So Nebuchadnezzar was sort of saying, I've had enough of this carnival fortune teller antics of you people. So tell me what the dream was. And, if they could really interpret it, they should have been able to do so. Because, it's not impossible, because Daniel did it later on, but we'll get to that. Verse 10, the Chaldeans answered before the king and said, There is not a man upon the earth that can shew the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, or ruler that asks such things as any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. And that's true. The Lord doesn't talk to people who do that. Quite true. Verse 11, And it is a rare thing that the king requireth, and there is none other that can shew it before the king, except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. And isn't that interesting that they would say that? They seem to be aware that there was a god or gods in their estimation, but they didn't know how to contact him or what to do in order so that they would be known of him and be able to have what Daniel did later on, but we'll get to that. Verse 12, For this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. Then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. And again, you can see he was included within them. Nebuchadnezzar didn't quite yet have the idea, the awareness that Daniel was no ordinary wise man. Verse 15, he answered and said unto Arioch, the king's captain, Why is the decree so hasty from the king? Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time, and that he would shew the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house, and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah his companions, that they should desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning the secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And keeping in mind at this particular time, Daniel was not a prophet. He was simply a very righteous young man. And I'm not talking about Judaism, because that didn't exist yet. He was simply following what the Lord originally gave to those people. All of Israel, all of humanity, but Israel first, because they were a prophecy of the coming kingdom of God. I'll put the link on for that. So he prayed. Verse 19, Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness. The light dwelleth with him. I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hath given me wisdom and might, and hast made known unto me now what we desired of thee, for thou hast now made known unto us the king's matter. And there's a faith factor here as well, isn't there? Because he had a dream and he realized it was from the Lord, and he had absolutely no doubt about it at all. And he thanked the Lord for it. Verse 24, therefore Daniel went in unto Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him, destroy not the wise men of Babylon, bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said unto Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? So again, Nebuchadnezzar was all business. He wasn't just saying, tell me a fortune, tell me a fantasy. He was saying, tell me the dream, and then interpret it. Verse 27, Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king hath commanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers shew unto the king, but there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came unto thy mind upon thy bed, what should come pass hereafter, and he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have, more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightst know the thoughts of thy heart. And again, you see the humility. If he went in there like a real showboat, a typical human of today, or a typical human of all times, probably he would have soon not known what he was talking about. Because it isn't about glorifying some human, or some would-be prophet, or some church founder. It's simply a matter of being a servant of the Lord, if ever the Lord chooses to make him one. And that's what happened. And that's a common factor in all the prophets. Not a single one of them was self-appointed. Not one. Ever. And that includes the Messiah, who was chosen and sent by the Father, and given what to say. Verse 31, thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, and no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. And again, that's referring, as we'll get to, but it just shows if you're clinging to this world, you're going to find yourself blown away. Verse 36, this is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art the head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, forasmuch as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these shall break it in pieces and bruise. I'll put the link on for those studies. Three of them actually, we know what they are because they're revealed in the Bible by name, and we also know what the fourth one is because it's recorded in the New Testament. And plainly we know that the head of gold was Babylon, because it's plainly just said that. And Persia, with the very famous handwriting on the wall, came, and the abomination of desolation was the Greeks, and then the Romans at the time of the birth of Christ. It's found throughout the Bible. But continuing, and I'll put the link on for those studies. Press for time. Verse 41, and whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay, and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, and as the toes of the feet, part of iron, part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, and they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And keeping in mind this is a future part of that, the end time part of it. As it's stated, we'll get to verse 44, and in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. And again, obviously that hasn't happened yet. And the prophecies of the Old Testament, so-called, so many people won't even bother reading them. And why not? You know, they're not way back there. They're yet in the future. They're yet to happen. And the flow of the past to that end time fulfillment, the reaching of the destination, you know, we're in that river of time. We're traveling along it. We're experiencing it. Verse 45, for as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. And as we'll get to in subsequent chapters from Daniel, it goes into very specifics as well. We know from history what they are, obviously, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. But we also know from the Bible, right up to the Greeks, we also know the names of people. It's just an amazing heritage. It's the reason some historians, say that it couldn't have been written when it was because it's too accurate, and yet we know when it was written. That denial is silly. Verse 46, then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and the chief governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat on the gate of the king. And again, he in effect became the prime minister of Babylon. And isn't that amazing? And how the Israelites had done that on a number of occasions. Joseph in Egypt became the prime minister of Egypt. Esther became the queen of Persia, or queen of Iran, as it's known today. But you can see there, and again, I'll put the links on for the studies. We're out of time for today, but the connections that we can read of here, obviously from history, that any historian could read this and know what he's talking about. If you know what Babylon was the first one, and it plainly says it is. Thou art the head of gold. He was talking to the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar specifically. And we know it fell to Persia. We know that fell and turned to Greece. And then Greece broke up, as specifically as we'll get to in subsequent chapters, and broken into 4 pieces. It's just an amazing thing of a young king who had no heirs, exactly a description of Alexander, and we'll get to that in our subsequent studies. But it is an amazing book. Daniel is something that anybody who is interested in history should read, because of the amazing detail of history that is there. But if you happen to be a Christian, then you should be reading this for the simple reason that if you happen to be living in the end time, you're going to experience much of what was written in the book of Daniel. And even if you're not, if you die in the meantime, you're still going to experience the very end of it. We're speaking of the resurrections. That's in Daniel too, as we'll get to in coming sermons. Thank you for joining us for services this week. As always, your being with us makes our joy complete. Until next week when we meet again on this, God's holy Sabbath day, may the Lord bless thee and keep thee. May the Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. God bless you all.